The Gestapo, or Geheime Staatspolizei, was the secret police force of Nazi Germany, and it became one of the most feared and terrifying organizations in history. Established by Hermann Göring in 1933, shortly after Adolf Hitler came to power, the Gestapo was responsible for suppressing opposition to the Nazi regime and enforcing its draconian laws. Unlike traditional police forces, the Gestapo operated without legal limitations, and its tactics were ruthless, brutal, and terrifying. The organization's primary function was to protect the regime by eliminating threats real or imagined using any means necessary, including torture, assassination, and intimidation. The Gestapo's role was not just about surveillance and arresting political opponents. It was also about instilling fear and creating an atmosphere of total control. Its agents infiltrated every aspect of German society, from workplaces to schools, to ensure that anyone suspected of anti-Nazi activity would be silenced or eliminated. Their motto, "Eradication of enemies of the state," was a chilling reflection of their mission. The Gestapo's presence was felt everywhere, yet its methods were often shrouded in secrecy, making it all the more terrifying for the German population. The Gestapo's agents had the authority to operate without oversight. They could arrest anyone they suspected of being disloyal to the Nazi regime, often without evidence or trial. These arrests would often be followed by long periods of interrogation, during which the accused were subjected to physical abuse and psychological torture. Many of the prisoners were sent to concentration camps where they would either die from exhaustion, starvation, or exposure, or be used as forced labor. Under the leadership of Reinhard Heydrich, known as the Butcher of Prague, the Gestapo became an instrument of terror not just within Germany, but across the territories occupied by the Nazis. Heydrich, who oversaw the final solution, the Nazi plan for the extermination of the Jews, used the Gestapo to enforce the regime's racial policies. As a central figure in the Holocaust, Heydrich used the Gestapo to round up Jewish individuals, political dissidents, and resistance members, sending them to concentration camps or death camps in places like Auschwitz and Treblinka. One of the Gestapo's most notorious actions was the Kristallnacht, or Night of Broken Glass. In November 1938, in a coordinated attack, the Gestapo rounded up thousands of Jewish men, women, and children, destroyed synagogues, looted Jewish homes and businesses, and arrested Jews in their homes. The Gestapo, along with the SS, played a central role in the violent pogrom, marking the escalation of violence against Jews that would eventually lead to the Holocaust. The Gestapo's reach was far-reaching. It was not limited to political dissidents or enemies of the regime. The police force was also responsible for enforcing Nazi policies on ethnic minorities, especially Jews, and rounding up Roma, the mentally ill, and others deemed undesirable by the regime. The Gestapo worked in close collaboration with the SS or Schutzstaffel, which was in charge of executing the Nazi regime's policies of racial purity and the extermination of Jews and other non-Aryans. The Gestapo also worked relentlessly to eliminate resistance movements within Nazi-occupied territories. Whether it was the French resistance in France, the Polish Home Army in Poland, or the White Rose movement in Germany, the Gestapo infiltrated and dismantled any group that dared oppose Nazi rule. Their success was partly due to their ability to turn neighbors, friends, and even family members against each other. The Gestapo's informants were everywhere, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and fear that made it difficult for people to trust anyone. Their methods were also designed to ensure complete control. Secret surveillance, wiretapping, and informants were used to gather intelligence on people's private lives. The Gestapo would send agents into communities to stir up distrust and fear, creating divisions within the population. This atmosphere of terror made it difficult for people to resist or even express opposition without fearing for their lives. The Gestapo's grip on power was not easily shaken. Even after the fall of Nazi Germany in 1945, the legacy of the Gestapo's terror lingered. Many former Gestapo agents went on to work for the CIA and other intelligence agencies, continuing to use their skills in torture, manipulation, and surveillance. The horrors inflicted by the Gestapo are still felt today in the form of historical memory and the ongoing fight for human rights. The Gestapo's role in Nazi Germany was not only about enforcing laws but also about creating an atmosphere of constant fear. Operating as the secret police of the Third Reich, the Gestapo had unchecked powers to detain, torture, and kill anyone it deemed a threat to the Nazi regime. Reinhard Heydrich, often called the Butcher of Prague, was one of the key figures behind the Gestapo's rise to power. As chief of the Reich Security Main Office, he wielded unparalleled control over the operations of the Gestapo and the SS, the Nazi paramilitary group responsible for carrying out the regime's most brutal policies. One of the Gestapo's primary tasks was the elimination of political opposition. Anyone suspected of being a communist, socialist, or liberal was considered a potential threat to Nazi control and was subject to immediate arrest, torture, and execution. Resistance groups, labor unions, and political parties were hunted down and systematically destroyed. The Gestapo used informants, spying networks, and brute force to maintain control, ensuring that no one could voice dissent without facing the wrath of the state. One of the most terrifying aspects of the Gestapo was their use of informants to infiltrate communities. They created a climate of suspicion in which neighbors, friends, and even family members were encouraged to report each other to the authorities. This system of surveillance created an atmosphere of paranoia, as people could never be sure who was loyal to the regime and who was not. Fear of being denounced by an informant was a constant threat that kept the general population silent and submissive. The Gestapo's ability to operate outside of the law made them even more dangerous. They were untouchable by normal legal processes, and their agents had absolute power over individuals. They could arrest anyone without a warrant, interrogate them without oversight, and execute them on the spot if deemed necessary. Torture was a common practice, as the Gestapo sought to extract information, confessions, or simply to instill terror in the population. Victims of Gestapo torture often died from their injuries, and those who survived were left with deep psychological scars that would last a lifetime. Interrogation techniques used by the Gestapo were particularly horrific. Prisoners were subjected to physical abuse, including beatings, electric shock, and waterboarding. Psychological torture was equally devastating, with interrogators using threats, humiliation, and deprivation to break their victims. The Gestapo operated with complete impunity, knowing that no one could hold them accountable for their actions. The concentration camps that the Gestapo helped to operate were integral to their methods of control. The camps were not just places of detention, they were death traps. The Gestapo played a central role in organizing the deportation of Jews, Roma, and other marginalized groups to these camps. Once there, they were subjected to forced labor, starvation, medical experimentation, and eventually mass execution. The Gestapo's involvement in these death camps is a testament to the inhumanity of their methods and their dedication to the complete destruction of their enemies. In addition to their efforts to suppress political resistance and eliminate Jews, the Gestapo also targeted homosexuals, disabled individuals, and political dissidents. Their attacks on these groups were part of the broader Nazi agenda of racial purity and total control over society. The Gestapo enforced the Nazi laws that criminalized homosexuality, ensuring that LGBTQ+ individuals were hunted down, arrested, and often sent to concentration camps where they faced torture and execution. Despite their infamous reputation, the Gestapo's power and influence began to wane as World War II neared its end. As the Allies advanced through Europe, Nazi Germany began to collapse. In the last desperate days of the war, the Gestapo began executing many of its own officers who were suspected of betrayal or desertion. The collapse of the Nazi regime saw the fall of the Gestapo, but the scars left by their actions would remain long after the war was over. Following the war, many of the top Gestapo officers were brought to justice during the Nuremberg trials, but the full extent of their crimes was never fully accounted for. Some Gestapo officers managed to escape capture, fleeing to countries like South America, where they continued to live in hiding. Others, like Klaus Barbie, managed to escape justice for years before being extradited and convicted. Barbie, who had been responsible for the torture and deportation of Jews and resistance members in Lyon, was one of the most infamous of the Gestapo's officers. His capture and trial in the 1980s was a pivotal moment in the global quest for justice for Nazi war crimes. Even decades after the fall of Nazi Germany, the legacy of the Gestapo continued to resonate. In East Germany, the Stasi, the secret police of the German Democratic Republic, modeled its operations after the Gestapo, using similar tactics of surveillance, torture, and control. This continuity underscores the lasting impact the Gestapo had on the culture of state oppression and surveillance, even after its disbandment. The Gestapo's reign of terror was a product of the Nazi ideology that sought to control every aspect of life. The fear, brutality, and sheer terror they instilled in the population helped ensure the survival of the Nazi regime for as long as it did. Their tactics left a dark imprint on history, serving as a grim reminder of what happens when unchecked power is allowed to control and suppress society. The Gestapo's legacy is a warning that such organizations can arise again if vigilance and accountability are not maintained.